Now, I feel like I've started pretty much every review for The Bad Batch this season, other than maybe that Cody Crosshair episode, by talking about filler episodes. Not that I've called them all filler, or that I automatically think an episode is bad because it is filler, only that, yes, at this point, the show is beginning to feel a bit formulaic. We keep getting episodes where the team takes some sort of mission, a wrench gets thrown into the plan, usually because of something Omega does, and usually they end up failing the actual mission they set out to do, but they accomplish something else in the process, something that ends up being the better or right thing to do in the end. And though I'm not saying there's anything at all wrong with the show or this season thus far being like this, or that it wasn't all that long ago that pretty much all shows were very formulaic and episodic in nature, and thus there's no reason why this show doesn't work, why a show about soldiers of fortune who are still wanted by the Empire for crimes they were unwilling to commit against the Jedi, who now help when no one else can, assuming you can find them, assuming you can hire the B team. I'm not saying a show that uses this formula could never ever work, obviously it can and has before, or that I don't, by and large, enjoy The Bad Batch for what it is or has been this season. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of people who call this episode filler, which I wouldn't exactly argue against, though I still thought it was good and enjoyable. Only that, yes, it does kind of feel like we're sitting here waiting for the real season to begin. We're waiting to finally get to the heart of the story that we know is coming, thanks to all the early reviews that are out there for this season, because many have already been given by Disney or Lucasfilm, the first 14 of 16 episodes to check out and review. And from what I've heard about those reviews, I've mainly avoided them myself because I don't want too much spoiled, but from what I have heard, next week with this 2-part episode we're going to get, things really get going and they keep going till the end of the season. Which makes me ask 2 questions. One being, what exactly is the point of having these first half dozen episodes being so disconnected from all of that, or being so different from the back half of the season? Why start out with what I suppose could be called filler episodes? So, yes, I'm sure some of these things that we are seeing in these episodes will factor in down the road. And also, did Lucasfilm hand out a huge chunk of the season early to reviewers because they knew a lot of fans would be, well, let's just say not overly thrilled with these first several episodes, and they wanted to kind of keep them on the line with the promise of much better things to come? Anyway, whatever the case may end up being with all that, let's finally talk a bit about this episode called Tribe, an episode that featured the return of Gungi, who you may remember from the Clone Wars series. He was in the Youngling story arc, which starts with Ahsoka taking a group of them to Ilum to get their kyber crystals to make their lightsabers, and many things go wrong along the way. Anyway, we knew this episode, or at least one with him in it, was coming thanks to seeing him in the trailer. And it turns out that Gungi has been captured by droids that are part of the Vanguard Axis, a crime syndicate notorious for illegal smuggling, and that the Jedi Gungi is worth quite a bit to their buyer, whoever that might be. We don't get that answer, though it could certainly end up being the Empire, for all we know, even though the Vanguard Axis is also looking to buy, and no doubt resell, some Imperial chain codes, which is what has apparently brought the Bad Batch to them. We've seen before in that first season that Tech knows how to forge these things. Another thing we don't know is who sent them there in the first place. How did they learn about this job? Because this time we didn't get that sort of obligatory opening scene where we spend a few minutes with Sid telling them about this job she has before they all too often begrudgingly agree to take it. Which I think means one of 2 things. Either it has nothing to do with Sid and they somehow heard about it from another source and they didn't want to spend time explaining that source, which is all fine and good. We didn't need the backstory if that's the case. Or I suppose it could be they did hear about this job from a contact of Sid's, and considering how sideways things went, the Bad Batch literally shot the place up, destroy some droids, take a huge payday from them, that being Gungi, who they rescue. And thus it then could and likely would bring a lot of heat back down onto Sid for sending the Bad Batch to them, and could end up being the reason in some way, shape, or form why she ends up betraying the Bad Batch, which has been alluded to in an earlier episode. It could be that, yes, all these quote-unquote filler episodes that we are getting early in the season will have some huge ramifications down the road. Either way, and unsurprisingly so, it turns out to be Omega who discovers and essentially rescues Gungi, or helps him rescue himself, you could say. The Bad Batch then, even though there might be an Imperial presence there, and it's Echo who points that out, they decide to return him home anyway to take him back to Kashyyyk, where he has not been in a very long time. And speaking of that, one of the things I enjoyed the most about this episode is seeing Gungi indeed go home to a planet he clearly doesn't remember. Like all Jedi, he was no doubt taken from a very young age and has little to no memory of his family or where he is from. So it was cool to see him start to rediscover some of his heritage, some of the Wookiee traditions and ways, you could say, like when they were talking to the trees who came up with a battle plan for them, which, yeah, did feel a little bit like Avatar, but it honestly feels like the sort of thing Wookiees would do anyway, not to mention Kashyyyk has been a thing much longer than Pandora has. We also saw that, sure enough, the Trandoshans, who we just know love hunting and enslaving and skinning Wookiees, the reward for capturing the Jedi in this episode was 100 Wookiee pelts, the skin of 100 sentient creatures, quite the prize to be given away in a quote-unquote kids show. Anyway, it turns out that with the help of the Empire, who have given them tanks and clone troopers, the Trandoshans are doing their favorite thing and rounding up Wookiees and just in general wreaking havoc on the planet Kashyyyk. And so what else can the Bad Batch do but help them out? And after coming upon a destroyed village, they, with the help of Genji, they take down some tanks and some Trandoshans before being found by other Wookiees riding some really cool looking mounts. Those Wookiees then take them back to their village, where again Gungi kind of gets a re-education on the ways of his people. But the problem is other Trandoshans find the destroyed tanks, they see marks on the tanks that look like they have been left by a lightsaber, and they realize a Jedi is around and they head deeper into the forest to get him towards the aforementioned village. We then get a big cool climactic fight scene that ends with spider creatures we'd encountered earlier in the episode, which are called Kinrath, and I think were first seen in Knights of the Old Republic. We see them come in and sort of save the day, even webbing up and taking away the leader of the Trandoshan crew, which I thought was a pretty cool and fitting ending. And though, as I said before, I did enjoy this episode, a lot of cool action, and I thought, as always, Kevin Kinder's score was magnificent. I also like, as I was saying, everything with Gungi, seeing him go home and kind of rediscover who he is and what it means to be a Wookiee. That was all good, albeit kind of a bit abbreviated. This was another episode I would have been fine with it being at least a few minutes longer and doing more with Gungi and his return home, doing more world building for Kashyyyk. But that wasn't even the only place I thought the episode could have spent just a bit more time, because it was once again an episode where the Bad Batch were just sort of there to do their job. And I don't mean their job in story as much as I mean for the story. They kind of keep feeling like little more than props or a backdrop in these type of episodes, where a different character is brought in and kind of completely outshines them. And I don't mean outshines them in terms of kicking more butt than they do. I'm kind of fine with Gungi being the star of the battle in many ways. He is a Jedi or a Jedi youngling. He's been on the run. Of course, he knows how to handle his business. But rather, I mean, there's very little character growth out of the Bad Batch in episodes like these, despite there being more than an opportunity for it, especially in this particular episode. I mean, I think there could have and should have been something at least resembling a debate about going to Kashyyyk, which, as I mentioned before, Echo does point out that it could have an Imperial outpost, and it could be dangerous for them and thus for Omega. But they just kind of shrug it off and go anyway, which isn't to imply I don't think they should have or would have helped a Jedi. They even talk about at one point how Gungi is right not to trust them, not to trust clones because of Order 66. And so I just think it would have been great to lean into all that more on both sides if Gungi was a little more leery of the clones, and if the clones or the Bad Batch had shown some reluctance out of helping him, that they didn't want to risk their own to help him out or get home. Until Order 66 is brought up, how their brothers turned on and betrayed the Jedi, and how they now, you could say, kind of owe him that they can at least save another Jedi, keeping in mind that, yes, Hunter did kind of help save Kanan in that first episode of the Bad Batch. But instead of doing something like that, and maybe making the episode a few minutes longer, we instead just have them all kind of get along and go on this mission, and in the end we get this little sort of speech by Hunter about how, yeah, it was the right thing to do all along, good job us. And so, I don't know, it just feels like this episode, again, it just could have been about 5 minutes longer and had a lot more going on other than just being this kind of cool, fun, action-packed episode that takes us to Kashyyyk, lets us see some Trandoshan and Wookiee action and all of that. I mean, it had a few nice moments too with Gungi, which again, I did like it. I did think it was a pretty fun and enjoyable episode, but I do feel like it could have and really should have been just a little bit more. Well, that's all I got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode. Was it good, bad, or somewhere in between? Did you enjoy the return of Gungi, and what do you think happens to him now? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.